Marcus Warren had always led a life of quiet insignificance, cast in the shadows of his parents' well-established reputation. The Warrens, residing in their serene, suburban enclave, were pillars of the community. Henry Warren, a retired professor of literature, was a figure of intellectual respect, while Judith, his wife, was celebrated for her hospitality and nurturing spirit. Their son Marcus had always been a passive presence, a bookish individual who lived comfortably within the confines of his parents' success. However, as his 30th birthday loomed, something insidious began to unravel within him. It began subtly. Marcus, who had once been known for his mild-mannered temperament, started to display uncharacteristic irritability. It was a minor annoyance at first, a sharp retort over a forgotten grocery list, an unreasonably harsh tone when asked about his day. Henry dismissed these episodes as signs of stress, suggesting that Marcus was merely experiencing the pressures of approaching a milestone age. "He's just going through a phase," Henry would say, his voice tinged with paternal reassurance. Judith, however, sensed an unnerving change. Her unease heightened whenever she caught a fleeting glimpse of something dark in her son's eyes. The tension crescendoed one evening during a family dinner. The table was set with Judith's meticulous care, and the warm, familial chatter that usually filled the room was punctuated by Marcus's sudden, violent outburst. Without warning, he lunged at his father, knocking over a glass of red wine that splattered across the tablecloth. The dinner ended abruptly, with Marcus retreating to his room in silence, leaving his parents in a state of stunned confusion. As days turned into weeks, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began to isolate himself more, spending hours behind the locked door of his room, emerging only to eat or snap at his parents. Judith and Henry noticed that their son seemed detached from reality, lost in his own world of disturbing thoughts. Judith's anxiety deepened when she overheard muffled cries from Marcus's room one night. She pounded on the door, her voice trembling with fear as she pleaded with him to open it. When Marcus finally emerged, his arms were covered in deep, self-inflicted cuts. Blood had seeped through his sleeves and stained the carpet beneath him. His face was expressionless, his eyes vacant as he muttered, "I need to feel alive." The Warrens, now profoundly alarmed, sought professional help, but Marcus's reluctance to see a therapist compounded their desperation. His condition deteriorated rapidly. He would sit for hours, staring vacantly at the walls, muttering incoherently. His previously benign presence had become a source of dread and confusion for Judith and Henry. They were paralyzed by fear, unable to comprehend the darkness that had engulfed their son. The situation escalated one fateful night, plunging the household into a nightmare. Judith and Henry were asleep in their bed, unaware of the impending terror. Marcus, armed with a heavy axe, crept silently into their room. With a chilling, methodical precision, Marcus raised the axe high above his head. Without a hint of hesitation, he brought it down in a savage arc. The axe struck Henry and Judith simultaneously, the force of the blows sending blood splattering across the room. The violence was swift and brutal, their bodies convulsing briefly before falling lifelessly onto the blood-soaked sheets. The room was engulfed in a macabre silence. The commotion had not gone unnoticed. Neighbors, startled by the sounds of the massacre, quickly alerted the police. Father, the local priest, revered for his deep faith and spiritual strength, was summoned to address the horrifying scene. Arriving at the Warrens' home, he was met with a grisly tableau of carnage. Father immediately began to perform prayers and rituals, his voice rising in desperate pleas to exorcise any malevolent entities that might have possessed Marcus. Despite Father's earnest efforts, Marcus's condition only worsened. As dawn approached, the oppressive silence of the house was palpable, and Marcus's life slipped away into the void. Father, emotionally and physically drained, could only offer his final prayers as the sun rose over a home forever marred by the horrors of the night. The Warrens' house, once a symbol of warmth and respectability, stood as a silent witness to the unimaginable tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The business meeting finally concluded late on a Friday night. The clock showed 11 o'clock, and I faced a 3-hour drive before I could reach home. As I navigated the lonely highway, the darkness seemed to swallow my car whole, with only the dim glow of my headlights piercing the thick black void. The road was eerily empty. Not a single car in sight, no roadside lights, just the endless stretch of asphalt winding through barren fields and desolate countryside. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as the result of a long, exhausting day. About an hour into my drive, I noticed something strange. In the distance, through the thick fog that had begun to settle, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, squinting to make out who or what it was. As I approached, I saw a man, or at least what appeared to be a man. His clothes were tattered, and his skin had a ghostly pallor, almost translucent in the beam of my headlights. I rolled down my window slightly. "Hey, do you need help?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to walk towards my car, slow and deliberate. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was very wrong. My instincts screamed at me to drive away, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. When the figure was just a few feet from my car, I saw its face clearly for the first time. Hollow eyes stared back at me, dark and endless like bottomless pits. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharp, decayed teeth. Panic surged through me. I slammed on the gas, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure standing motionless in the middle of the road, watching me. I tried to shake off the encounter, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I continued driving, the eerie feeling of being watched never left me. My heart pounded, every shadow seemed to move, following me. About 15 minutes later, my car started to sputter. The engine light flickered on, and before I knew it, the car stalled. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and miles away from the nearest town. I got out of the car, hoping to find a signal by walking a bit. The night was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making every sound seem amplified. But then, another sound reached my ears, a faint whisper, almost like someone calling my name. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the darkness and the oppressive stillness of the night. I quickened my pace, desperate to find a signal. That's when I saw it again, the same ghostly figure standing by the side of the road, watching me with those hollow eyes. I broke into a run, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the air. I stumbled back to my car, locking myself inside. My hands shook as I tried to restart the engine. To my relief, the engine roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, speeding down the foggy road. The dense fog made it nearly impossible to see, but I didn't dare slow down. The whispers followed me, a haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Then, out of nowhere, a tree loomed in front of me. I yanked the steering wheel to the side, but it was too late. My car skidded on the wet pavement and crashed head-on into the tree. Dazed and injured, I crawled out of the wrecked car. The whispers were gone, replaced by a deafening silence. I looked around, my vision blurry and my body aching. The figure was nowhere to be seen. I limped away from the car, desperate to find help. The road stretched out before me, an endless path shrouded in fog and darkness. I stumbled down the road, my strength fading with each step. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, hoping the driver would see me. The car slowed down and stopped beside me. A man got out, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" he asked. I tried to explain, but my voice was weak and shaky. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing I remembered was the man calling for help, his voice echoing in the night. I awoke in a hospital bed, enveloped by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of monitors. A nurse informed me that I had been found unconscious on the roadside, with no clear reason for how I ended up there. They attributed it to exhaustion, suggesting that my mind had conjured everything in a delirious state. Being someone who relies on reason and clear-headed analysis has always been a defining trait of mine. Yet, the events of last October were beyond comprehension. I used to live in a charming old house on the edge of town. Its age gave it a unique character and a sense of history, but also an unsettling silence that settled in after dark. At first, I found it serene. Then the whispers began. The house was a relic from a past era, boasting Victorian architecture and an overgrown garden. The wooden floors creaked beneath my feet, and the walls seemed to carry the echoes of bygone generations. During the day, sunlight poured through the large stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the walls and floors. But come nightfall, the house transformed, shadows stretched and deepened, and an oppressive silence took over the rooms. It started innocuously enough. Just faint murmurs I would catch while I was drifting off to sleep. I dismissed them as the wind rustling through the old wooden beams or the distant sound of my neighbors' late-night conversations. But as the nights grew longer and colder, the whispers grew more distinct, more insistent. "Come find me," they would say. "I'm waiting." Sleep eluded me. I began to dread the sunset, knowing that with the night would come the voices. They seemed to be coming from the basement. I had always found the basement unsettling. It was a place I rarely ventured. It was filled with the remnants of past occupants, old furniture covered in dust, boxes of forgotten possessions, and cobwebs that clung to every corner. The walls were lined with shelves that held jars of who knows what, their contents long since turned to dust. The floor was cold and damp, and the smell of mold was pervasive. One particularly frigid night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to investigate. I descended the creaking stairs into the basement. The whispers grew louder, almost excited. "You're close," they hissed. My breath came out in shallow gasps. The air was thick, suffocating. There in the far corner stood an old, rotting chest. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Compelled by an unseen force, I approached the chest. The whispers were now a cacophony of urgent murmurs, urging me to open it. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was an old, tattered journal. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded. As I flipped through it, a particular entry caught my eye. October 31st, 1923. The Phantom Killer claims another victim. They say he whispers to his prey, driving them mad with fear before he strikes. I fear I am next. A chill ran down my spine. This was impossible. A 100-year-old journal recounting the same whispers I had been hearing. My hands shook violently as I read on. He comes at night, unseen, unheard by others. Only the chosen can hear his whispers. They say he cannot be stopped, cannot be killed. He is a phantom, a shadow in the dark. The room grew colder, the air heavier. I could feel a presence behind me, cold breath on my neck. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure, tall, gaunt, and shrouded in darkness. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a twisted smile played on his lips. "You're mine now," he whispered. Panic surged through me. I ran up the stairs, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frenzied. I could hear his footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. There was no escaping him. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, the door trembling under his relentless assault. The whispers were inside my head now, filling every corner of my mind. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Desperation drove me to open the journal once more, hoping for some clue, some way to stop him. The final entry was a hastily scrawled note. The only way to escape is to become him, to pass on the curse, to whisper to another. A chill ran down my spine. There was no way out, no rescue in sight, The only path to survival was to sacrifice another. The door crashed open, and he entered, his gaze piercing into mine. Beside he hissed, "War perish." I had no other option. I couldn't let fear consume me to the point of death. I had to live, even if it meant turning into the thing I dreaded most. Now, here I am, speaking to you in the stillness of night, waiting. For you